Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show, while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to, before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and delve into the topic du jour for this afternoon's program, namely this call for more gun control here in the heart of the land of the free and the home of the brave. One of the reasons that I want to bring this to our attention, that these gun grabbers out there are doing everything within their power to attempt to make us less safe as a nation and people, is because of a personal event that happened yesterday evening to a neighbor of mine who has been my neighbor for 20 plus years. What happened to my neighbor was somebody broke into his garage and stole numerous amounts of power tools and other equipment. Fortunately and thankfully, nobody was hurt. But one of the things that comes to mind with respect to this is, yes, why we have the Second Amendment is not only to protect us against a rogue and tyrannical as well as illegitimate government, but it's also to protect us against those elements within society that would do anything and everything within their power to attempt to cause harm to us, to harm our friends, family, loved ones, those people who are important to us. All of this has to be kept in mind. And the reason it has to be kept in mind is when we stop and think about it under the totality of the circumstances and with a modicum of objectivity, we begin to see beyond a shadow of the doubt that there are those nefarious elements out there who are ready, willing, and able at the drop of a hat to strike out against us, to cause us the ultimate amount of harm and chaos. The world is not all sunshines and roses. The world is a dangerous place, and therefore it is absolutely imperative that we have at our disposal the best tools available in order to secure our own protection as well as the protection of others. Another attribute that applies to this is the legal notion or the legal ideology of self-defense and defense of others. It is a right that we possess as individual American sovereign citizens. But when you look at the annals of social media and the way that gun owners are being painted as a pariah, painted as a group of people that are untrustworthy or are in the same category as those who would violate the rights of their fellow countrymen and women, it's not only intellectually disingenuous, it's not only insulting, it is factually incorrect. The reason I say it's factually incorrect is when we stop and think about this under the totality of the circumstances and in an objective fashion, we see that the vast majority of gun owners in the land of the free and the home of the brave are responsible with their firearms. They don't use them in an attempt to cause harm to their fellow citizens. But that's not the way that the debate's framed. They always approach this from not a presumption of innocence, but rather from a presumption of guilt. They demand that we, in our capacity as law-abiding, gun-owning American citizens from coast to coast and border to border in these United States of America, prove that we won't violate the rights of others. You see, it's a bit like Minority Report here. They're trying to prevent crimes in the future, but that is not the way a legal system can work. Look, what happened at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School on February 14th, 2018, there in Parkland, Broward County, Florida, is an undeniably heinous, senseless, and unspeakable tragedy of a biblical proportion. That being said, the way that the gun control advocates are pushing the narrative, they're making it seem as though gun violence is a very common happenstance, and they've purposely skewed the numbers in a way that really has no connotation or connection with reality. And again, it's to push an underlying propagandist narrative and agenda. Remember that Eric Holder, the former Attorney General under former President Barack Hussein Obama, said that their end goal, their ultimate end goal with respect to all of this, was to attempt to have firearm owners in America painted in the same light as cigarette smokers or tobacco users. And that's par for the course with respect to those which we have colloquially named here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, as the frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftists. They always attempt to do that. It comes straight from the pages of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. And the reason that it comes from that is that has been their Bible. That has been their playbook for generation after successive generation. And ladies and gentlemen, it shows no signs of changing or going away within the foreseeable future. So therefore, it falls on our shoulders in our individual capacity as United States citizens to try and bring our rights back to a position of strength. And not just strength, but back to a position of legitimate legal authority. Of course, the issue that we have been encountering time and again with respect to all of this is that the Fabians and those so-called conservatives who are ready, willing, and able to surrender the rights of their fellow popular sovereigns, at the drop of a hat, is that they don't care about legality. Yes, they try and paint themselves off as being of the sort of people that would care about this, who would act in a fashion that would keep people safe, but that's just a convenient, opportunistic thing for them. It gives them the ability to claim that they want that, but in actuality, what they are trying to do is to really operate outside of the law. The reason that I state this as emphatically as I do and as authoritatively as I do is when you look at exactly what it is that they are doing, they're trying to paint it off as though the law, which is the supreme law of the land, that being our shared United States Constitution, is antiquated, and therefore is not doing its job to protect the American citizens. But if you stop and think about it, what is the purpose of the Bill of Rights or first 10 amendments to our shared United States Constitution? The answer to that rather rhetorical question is that the purpose of the Bill of Rights is to protect us and to ensure that our rights are secure against a government that would become heavy-handed. Remember that our founding fathers viewed the government, or government in general, as a necessary evil. But when we use that phrase, necessary evil, it does not follow that the government is some benign and benevolent thing. The government is something that the people, in their capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this republic of ours, are supposed to constrain. And the way that we constrain the government, thereby ensuring that it doesn't grow outside of what it was originally intended to be, is to foster a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution, and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, of which the right to keep and bear arms is included. It's also to ensure that we watch the government like hawks, because they will not necessarily look out for our best interests. In fact, 9 times out of 10, when we encounter a recurring problem in this constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic of ours. It is when the government is operating in clear contradiction to the Constitution itself. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that's not something that can be ignored, nor is that something that we can afford to take lightly as American citizens. The reason that I say that is, again, the individual accountability, working with self-responsibility, thereby making us self-determinate, that is an integral part of who we are as a nation and people. And yes, it can be very difficult to make these things mesh. But the reason that I brought up my neighbor is because what we have seen is that there are still those people who have wanton hearts, meaning people that are filled with evil, sociopaths, psychopaths, those types who would do anything and everything to cause harm. And just because we pass new laws, those who violate the laws are already breaking the law. What is one more law to them? Why would they even care that a new gun control measure has been passed? They're not going to follow the law. They're already not following the law. Ergo, it follows that what occurs is that these sorts of gun control measures don't make us safer, and in fact only serve to punish law-abiding citizens, because it's the law-abiding citizens that follow the rules and regulations. But one of the things that I've noticed that comes up in the annals of social media, particularly from those who are just rabidly fanatic in their point of view of attempting to strip and deprive citizens of their fundamental and inalienable right to keep and bear firearms, is that they sit there and try and stretch the Second Amendment to ridiculous points. Oh, well, why not have grenades? Why not have nuclear bombs? Why not have rockets or what have you? But actually, that is irrelevant. It doesn't say that it can be limited. And the Founding Fathers included the term arms as opposed to firearms because, yes, we are a part of the militia, the national body. It is a deterrent. Consequently, it is exactly the point and intention of the Second Amendment for the private citizens to have the same style weapons as the military. Why? Because they have to serve in a military capacity. Then the next little argument that comes forth, the next intellectually disingenuous position that is assumed not only by the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists, but also some of those on the right who are strong advocates for gun control, is that, well, look, the military is going to be able to wipe you out. Have you seen a plane? Have you seen tanks? Have you seen these tactical mechanized weapons of modern warfare? You simply won't stand a chance. Well, irrespective of the fact that our founding fathers stood up against the most powerful military force known to man in the latter half of the 18th century by waging that long, drawn-out, bloody affair known as the American War of Independence against Great Britain, it's not always the case that having military technology can always wipe out the people that have lesser technology. Think about this. When our servicemen and women were there in Fallujah, in Iraq, or in Afghanistan, think about how difficult it was to go house to house. Close quarter combat is difficult, and it can easily take away a number of the tactical as well as strategic advantages that a technologically superior force can bring to bear. And it's going to be even more difficult, particularly on a psychological level, if it is going against the people. The vast majority of members of our respective armed services are not going to like the idea of turning their weapons on their fellow countrymen and women. After all, the oath of office that they take is hardly different than the oath of office that I have taken as an officer of the court. It is to defend and uphold the Constitution against all enemies, be they foreign or domestic. But therein lies one of the questions. Just exactly who is a domestic enemy? Somebody like Nicholas Cruz would be. Why? Because he is seeking to strip and deprive people of their fundamental rights. The Ninth Amendment to our shared United States Constitution is quite clear that we can't use rights or other rights contained within the supreme law of the land, which pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, what is known in the common American vernacular as the Supremacy Clause, is none other than our shared United States Constitution itself, to disparage other rights retained by the people. In other words, my rights end where your rights begin and vice versa. So when people are sitting there trying to argue from an intellectually disingenuous position of saying that your right to own firearms doesn't trump my right to life, in a way they're right, but their right to life also doesn't trump my right to protect my life and my right to keep and bear firearms. The rights are of equal measure. The reason that I can state that is because, when you think about it, the purpose of the Second Amendment is actually there to defend the right to life. It's there to defend all other rights. And when you think about the actual positioning of the Second Amendment within the Bill of Rights, placing it as the Second Amendment, if you remember, the last part of the First Amendment is mentioning the petitioning the government for a redress of grievance. So whenever they sit there and say, well, it's technically unconstitutional if you're going to sit there and say that you would be moving against a rogue and tyrannical government, wrong. When the government reaches a position where it no longer provides a redress for grievances, and after the people have done anything and everything within their power to attempt to reach a peaceable resolution, then the next step is to have to be able to defend our rights. And that's why the Second Amendment follows immediately thereafter. It's the same thing with, well, why... the Constitution's outdated. Why do we need the Third Amendment? I mean, people don't get quartered soldiers in their houses. Yes, that is actually an important thing. If there is that kind of social strife or insurrection or bloody chaos in the streets of the land of the free and the home of the brave, then how are you going to enforce that to keep soldiers out? Because they will try and entrench in homes. That's, where they'll set up their officer quarters, etc., etc. Well, the only way that you could enforce that is with the Second Amendment. That's why the Third Amendment followed the Second Amendment. There really is a logical track and train to all of this. Therefore, when we think of a Constitution, we can't really take it in a piecemeal fashion. We cannot selectively discuss parts that we like or pick out parts that we like and ignore parts that we dislike, because at the end of the day, that works against us, and it serves to undermine the entire document. Again, this is part of the reason why we say that the United States is a nation of laws and not of men. We chose to unite around a supreme law. And of course, that supreme law is none other than the United States Constitution in and of itself. And so if we take out the Second Amendment, then you're not going to be able to defend your First Amendment rights, and the government will have carte blanche to basically tell you what you can or can't say. You're not going to be able to keep soldiers out. You're not going to be able to have a warrant protection. You're not going to have the ability to protect yourself, and the legal system will start to collapse upon itself. All of this is intertwined. All of it is interrelated, and it is an aspect that is fundamental to how this nation operates. But of course, we see that people like David Media Hog, who is using the death of his friends and classmates, which is absolutely tragic. No one who is a gun rights advocate is out there literally saying, beyond a shadow of the doubt, that what we want to see happen is the harm or any harm to America's high school age children. Nothing could be further from the truth. But when he sits there and catapults himself up into the national spotlight, placing himself in front of the cameras of the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, it's not to speak about preserving rights or protecting rights. Now, there have been survivors from Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School who are out there trying to say, look, it's not the guns that did this, it's either mental health or it was a failure to act at all levels of government. Kyle Kashov is one that comes to mind. Yet we see that that is not discussed. Very few people have heard of him. Why? Because the media won't give him the time of day. There is this type of double standard, and it is a disgusting double standard. It is one that we can ill afford to allow to continue unchecked and unchallenged, because at the end of the day, the propagandist narrative and agenda, the ulterior motives of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media is to strip us of our rights. It is to put us in a less secure position. And it's all based off of an intellectually disingenuous position on their part in the first place. You see, that's the thing that can't be ignored. That's the thing that keeps coming to the surface time and time again, to the point of it reaching ad nauseum. And ladies and gentlemen, they don't care. Quite frankly, that's what it comes down to. They don't care about the harm that it causes you. They don't care about the detrimental or deleterious impact that it has on the societal fabric and framework of these United States of America. They just want to push their agenda come hell or high water. And that's one of the things that my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I have been warning here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, dating back to our premiere episode, which aired on September 11th of 2015. And when we stop and think about it, part of the reason that we have the Second Amendment is to protect us from those sorts of things as well. And you notice that what these people do, those who are cowardly, those who are depraved, they always seek out a soft target. Why? They seek out a soft target because they want to go down the path of least resistance. And it's one of those inescapable and self-evident truths that keeps coming to the surface time and again. One of those things that we can't just look away from. But I want to actually focus a little bit on some of the claims that have been made on social media with respect to the idea that all of a sudden the Second Amendment, if it was repealed, it actually would stop people like a Nicholas Cruz, because they try and say that the psychology is different. He wouldn't run in and stab people because that's a different mindset or a different psychology than one who would go and identify himself, as Cruz did, on places such as YouTube as a professional school shooter. Be that as it may, just taking away firearms is not actually going to change them. Criminality tends to be a shared prognosis. And in other words, those that would engage in these activities aren't going to care that there are laws and restrictions. Okay, a prime example of this is, let's go ahead and put as many restrictions on the right to keep and bear arms in direct violation of the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of the Second Amendment and see if it stops these attacks. Well, remember, it wasn't all that long ago that there was that attempted school shooting in Maryland where it was an armed police officer or school police officer who actually put an end to it. The kid was 17 years old, stole the Glock that he used from his father, and let's take a look at some of the laws that were on the books in Maryland. Maryland has a quote-unquote assault weapons ban. Maryland prohibits, just as all of the United States prohibits the purchase of handguns by anyone under 21 years of age. That went in with the 1993 so-called Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act. They have very stringent background checks. They have registration of firearms. Did any of those things stop this kid? Nope. But there was something that did stop the kid. There was one thing that really stopped the kid. And that is the notion of a good guy with a gun. And the left just seems to get into a tizzy. But not just the left. All of these advocates for increased gun control measures get into a tizzy over this because they cannot factually point to anything that they suggest working. How would it prevent school shootings? How would it prevent mass shooting incidents? You see, when you start to ask them those questions, which are the vital questions which need to be asked, they don't want to discuss it. They don't want to look at it. They don't want to even consider it. And the reason they don't is because they know within their mind and within their heart of hearts that they are incapable of maintaining an actual argument, that they are incapable of winning in the free marketplace of ideas. And again, it's because there is nothing there which will back up their claims. And again, their claims are intellectually disingenuous. Their claims are built upon a notion that what they're doing would somehow magically erase the problems that we have encountered with these mass shooting incidents. And they want to say that there is a gun problem. It is not a gun problem. It can be argued that it's a cultural problem. Clearly, we are suffering from cultural blight, from the twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism. We are clearly suffering from a lack of discipline, from a lack of holding people accountable for their words, deeds, and actions. And that is the crux of the problem, ladies and gentlemen. That is where it lays. Because if we don't consider this, and if we don't move in a way to bring an end to that, then these things are going to continue on a repetitive basis, but not just a repetitive basis, they are going to be increasingly common. And by seeking to strip and deprive decent, law-abiding, gun-owning American citizens of their fundamental and inalienable rights, how is that solving anything? It goes back to one of the things that Blackstone, Lord Blackstone said, it is far better to let 10 guilty persons go than it is to punish one innocent person. Now, the way that the gun control advocates are attempting to bend this to their argument, attempting to bend it in a way that it will fit their narrative and agenda, is they come forth and they claim in no uncertain terms that, look, if you support the preservation of our right to keep and bear firearms, you are speaking ill of the children who are the survivors of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School or of the Parkland, Florida mass shooting incident. And when that doesn't work, because it can't work, because it is an intellectually disingenuous argument, it is a specious argument, to say the least, then they immediately come out and say that, well, you're a bigot, you're a racist, you hate people, blah, 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 blah. The reason it always goes down that line is because they are hysterical. Their arguments are based on mere histrionics, nothing more, nothing less. And therefore, they realize that if you start to combat them with facts, if you take a level-headed approach and attempt to discuss it as a sane, logical, rational adult, they know that their argument is going to fall flat on its face, that it cannot succeed in the free marketplace of ideas. So that's why they engage in logical fallacies. That's why they attempt to basically make us social pariahs. And again, as I mentioned earlier in the program, what all of that relates to, or what all of that points back to, is this Alinskyite tactic from rules from radicals. In other words, they're taking plays right out of the playbook of the Fabian socialist mentality and the Fabian socialist playbook. And again, none of that actually operates to the benefit of the United States as a nation or people, but particularly as a people. Now, one of the things that they try and interlace into this is they look at the language of the Second Amendment and try and basically get into a debate over whether the Second Amendment, because of the inclusion of the prefatory clause, that being the Militia Clause, the prefatory clause is just a reason, one of the reasons that it exists. It's a non-exhaustive thing, but they want to say it's a collective right, a right to the militia, not to individuals. But one of the things that Jeremy and I have stated over and over again on previous episodes of our state-of-the-art radio program is that militias don't have rights. People have rights. And that's where the operative clause comes in. It starts off with the prefatory clause, which is a well-regulated militia being necessary for the preservance of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, meaning not just firearms, but a wide array of arms, shall not be infringed. If the Founding Fathers had meant for the right of the people to keep and bear firearms to be solely restricted to the militia, it wouldn't say a well-regulated militia being necessary for the maintenance or preservation of a free state. It would say a militia being necessary for the maintenance of a free state, the right of the people to be in a militia and thereby have firearms or certain types of weapons for militia purposes or military purposes shall not be infringed. Notice the difference. That would be the way that they would have constructed it. And they certainly could have constructed it in that form and fashion if that was literally what their position was. If that is literally what their intent was, they would have drafted it in such a fashion. Therefore, the simple fact that they didn't draft it in that fashion speaks volumes about what their original intent truly was. Then the other thing is, what they try and say is, well, the militia is the National Guard. But the problem with that is, the militia is composed of the people. Federalist 46 made that very clear. And the government cannot create the militia. Whereas the National Guard was created by a statutory law, by an act or law that was passed by Congress, the militia can't be that because the militias of the several states pre-existed the drafting and ultimate ratification of the Constitution itself. It's the same reason why states have their own constitutions, because it is considered as in existence or as a policy that the 13 colonies predated the Constitution, and part of the agreement was whenever new states were added to the body politique of the United States, that they would enter as though they had been members of the original 13 colonies. So when we think of it in that form and fashion, yes, the National Guard constitutes a national militia. But the crux of the debate during the entire amendment process, which brought us the Bill of Rights, or first 10 amendments to our shared United States Constitution, the Anti-Federalists were afraid that having a national standing army would allow the federal government to come in and strip and deprive people of their right to keep and bear arms, which is exactly what the gun control advocates of today are pushing for. But then they try and sit there and say, look, the Founding Fathers couldn't have envisioned firearms technology of the likes that we have today. But if they had meant muskets, they would have just said muskets. And if we apply that kind of mindset, wouldn't we also have to apply it to all of the Bill of Rights? Therefore, freedom of speech could only be limited to parchment and quill pens. And therefore, we should just let the government have anything and everything that we have on our computers because that's modern technology. You see, this kind of mindset really is illogical. When you break it down into its core components, there is no other way to describe it than as illogical, because it is illogical. It is not based on logic, rather it is based on raw emotionalism. And they are trying anything and everything within their power to push an emotionally driven position here, because that's like what Kat Sunstein said, that frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist in his own right. He had said, never let a good crisis go to waste. And that is why these people immediately emerge out of the woodwork and attempt to seize upon our right to self-defense, our right to defend our families, and our right to protect ourselves from a rogue, tyrannical, and ultimately illegitimate federal government should that point in time come. Now, I am most certainly not advocating right now that we go run out and seek armed insurrection against the federal government. But it would be a totally specious position for us to claim that the Second Amendment was not intended for that purpose. It would be a totally intellectually disingenuous position for us to say that our Founding Fathers hadn't intended for the people to have the ability to throw off the chains of an oppressive government. If they didn't intend that, then why did they themselves do it against Great Britain? You see, if we adopted the mindset of those who are pushing for ever-increasing and ever-intrusive so-called common-sense gun control measures and regulations, we would have never become an independent nation. We would have never become the constitutionally endowed Federalist Representative Republic that we all know and love today. That is an inescapable truth. But one of the other things they try and do when they push this collectivist versus individual right is they say, well, certainly if it was for the militia purposes, then we could regulate the types of arms that they carry because it says a well-regulated militia. All a well-regulated militia means, based off of the plain meaning of the words, was a militia that is able to act, one that is knowledgeable about their weapons and how to use them. That's all that means. It does not mean regulated by law. It does not mean regulated in the types of firearms or weapons that could be carried. Remember that arms included swords, too. You see, they get into the minutia. They purposefully try to make things more complex than they need to be because they want to infringe the right. And the amazing thing about it is, time and again, I've noticed a number of those, particularly from those who claim to be conservatives, from those who claim to be from the right side of the American political sphere or aisle, is that, well, nobody's really trying to come after your guns, but we just need to have a discussion about sensible gun restrictions. That is trying to come after my ability to purchase firearms in the future of a certain time. That is an attempt to infringe upon the right of the people to keep and bear arms. They can try and tax it out of existence. That's what they always do. It's always an intellectually disingenuous position. They will find backdoor routes to try and make it so cost prohibitive that no average citizen would be able to exercise their right. And the devious thing about what they do, and the way that they attempt to constrain and limit our rights, is that with respect to the Second Amendment, it's funny because they want selective enforcement of the right, selective protection of the right. What if we did that with, say, the Eighth Amendment? Oh, well, they couldn't imagine cruel and unusual punishments that we have today, and therefore, to keep us safe, we should be able to torture American citizens. Or, they couldn't imagine school shootings, so if we find somebody who has said certain off-the-wall things, we should just be able to protect society by killing and torturing them before they even commit a crime. Or we should be able to enter into their house carte blanche without probable cause, without a warrant, without going through due process. Hey, even though it says except for as a punishment for a crime, duly adjudicated, indentured servitude and slavery is illegal, but, Congress, in the immediate wake and aftermath of that bloody affair known as the American Civil War, couldn't have imagined how welfare recipients would be lazy, and so, maybe they should be turned into slaves. Yes, the mindset seems ridiculous, but that is because it is ridiculous, and the same holds true irrespective of whether we are talking about the right of the people to keep and bear arms or any of the other constitutional rights that we have within the confines of the Constitution. The reason this doesn't get discussed in that way is because it is harmful to the ulterior motives and the narrative and agenda that has been embraced by those who would strip and deprive us of our right to keep and bear arms. It means that if we stop and think about this in a logical fashion, under the totality of the circumstances and with a modicum of objectivity, that their argument wouldn't stand up to muster. That their argument is not based on fact or reality or even in law. And here's the thing, if their little scheme would have been beneficial, if their little scheme would have worked, then why is it that it's never enough? You see, that's always the way it is. We have had major firearms legislation over the past 100 years. The National Firearms Act of 1934, the Gun Control Act of 1968, the rather intellectually disingenuously named Firearms Owners Protection Act of 1986, the School Zone the Gun-Free School Zones Act of 1990, the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act of 93, and the so-called Federal Assault Weapons Ban of 1994, which literally was allowed to sunset 10 years after it was enacted. All of that was supposedly designed to protect the children and to stop things and to have background checks and to make it as onerous as is humanly practicable and possible for law-abiding citizens to gain access to new firearms and technology that they would like to have. Let's take, for instance, the assault weapons ban. Oh, that was going to make us all safer. But you know what? Columbine happened in 1998, when that was still in place. Again, it shows that none of these proposals, none of these prospective rules and regulations would do a lick of good to prevent the sorts of things that these people are intellectually disingenuously foisting upon us as a solution, as something that would work. It just does not connect with reality. But you know, ladies and gentlemen, that doesn't matter to them. It's because, as I said earlier, school security, school safety, the rights of the people, that's not what matters to these people. It's power, manipulation, corruption, but above all, control. Yet, at the end of the day, one of the things that I am reminded of is that old adage that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That truly does apply here. That truly does work here. Because what they want to do is to ensure that the only ones who have the ability to act are the government. And it's why the debate about whether it applies to the militia or to the individuals is kind of important too, because, again, that's the crux of almost every political debate that we are having in the land of the free and the home of the brave at this current juncture. It is the individual versus the collective. Now, those who are pushing for increased gun control measures and restrictions are actually pushing a form of collectivism. This is why they go forth and talk about America being a democracy. It's why David Media Hog went out there and said, the adults don't know what they're doing with the democracy. We're not a democracy, Mr. Hog. We are a republic. The difference between a democracy and a republic is that a republic seeks to protect the rights of sovereign individuals. A democracy is nothing short of mob rule. It is majority rule. It is two wolves and a lamb voting for what's for dinner. The lamb is going to lose each time. But in a republic, an armed lamb can defend itself against the ravenous wolves who are attempting to kill it. You see, these types of arguments have been encountered in the United States before. It's the same song and dance, the same dog and pony show that we have seen time and time again, to the point of it reaching ad nauseum. And the only way that we can maintain our freedom is for us to have the ability to protect our rights. And the best tools at our disposal for accomplishing that would be the firearms that are part of the Second Amendment, the ability to keep and bear arms. And that is exactly the reason why the Founding Fathers stated beyond a shadow of the doubt that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It has to go down that line. It has to be implemented in that form and fashion, because if it is not, then tyranny is allowed to take control. Tyranny is allowed to come into position to take root in the body politique of the land of the free and the home of the brave, and that is something we can certainly ill afford to allow to come into fruition in this constitutional republic of ours. And the way that they have been trying to demonize and vilify gun owners just goes right down the line of exactly what it is that they really hope to accomplish. And that is to make the people totally subservient to, totally reliant upon the federal government. But as the Maryland attempted school shooting showed, it was not the firearm, it was failed public policies that make our schools unsafe. Remember, the Gun-Free School Zones Act literally made and continues to make American students less safe. It makes them an open and obvious target to those who have evil intentions in their heart and in their mind. And that is not going to change. That is not something that we can just magically wave a magic wand and have, poof, all of the so-called assault weapons and firearms disappear, and then, G-Hog Johnny the terrorist or David Media Hog the bully wouldn't attempt to use, wouldn't attempt to abuse. All of a sudden they'd become, ready, willing, and able to sing Kumbaya. It's ridiculous. It is that kind of utopian socialist mindset that is placing our nation at grave risk. And they are going to continue to ratchet down on this. They will not listen to logic. They will then sit there and say, look, your position on this is so inflexible and intransigent that you're going to cause the fundamental and inalienable right of the people to keep and bear firearms to be removed. Well, funny that they should think that. Funny that that should be their main position, because it really cannot be taken away. The Ninth Amendment, read in conjunction with Article 5, and all of the requirements that are there, also read in conjunction with the preamble to the Bill of Rights itself, says that the rights that are included here cannot be taken away, cannot be utilized in such a way as to deprive other rights retained by the people. Now again, I know that there are some who sit there and say that's not the intent the Founding Fathers had. But of course it was. The reason it was is because the Bill of Rights, or first 10 amendments to our shared United States Constitution, are based on the principles of the natural law. And therefore, they are immutable. They are just as applicable today as they were at the inception of this nation some approximate 239 plus years ago. Just as, God willing, they will be some approximate 239 plus years from today. But if we want that to remain, if we want that to be the case, then it is our duty, obligation, but above all responsibility in our individual capacity as American citizens to proactively maintain and safeguard our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. We have to be as stringent in our stance as we are, because the efforts to deprive us of our rights and of our liberties has become a far greater, more concentrated, more incessant, drip-by-drip type of approach, an incremental approach, that if we don't stand our ground, if we refuse to present a united front not only to ourselves, but arguably even more importantly still to the greater nation and world at large, then we're going to lose our rights. And you see, one of the things that has to be kept in mind also is that when it comes to our rights, we have to be responsible with them. We have to have that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our rights so that we can then freely exercise those rights. Again, this is why I have always stated that when it comes to our Constitution, when it comes to our rights, it's our duty to foster a fluent and working knowledge and understanding not only of our shared United States Constitution, but also our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. And that's the other thing. Those rights are not given to us by government, because if government gave us those rights, then yes, the gun control advocates would actually have a point. Government giveth and government can take away. Well, that's not what our founding fathers had intended to happen with respect to the Bill of Rights. They wanted to ensure that the rights of the people were protected. And not just for their time, for all time. It is why in the preamble to the Constitution itself, it said that, we, the people of the United States, in order to make a more perfect union, to secure the domestic tranquility, and to secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity, what they meant by that is not just for themselves, but for every generation that followed thereafter. And that includes the Second Amendment. In fact, that includes all of the attributes and aspects of our shared United States Constitution. But the gun control advocates don't care about that. They want to sit there and say that society has changed, that because to their mind the Constitution is antiquated, that means that we need to discard with it. And they may claim that they're not trying to deprive law-abiding citizens of their rights, but that's what each and every one of the measures that they have put forth has accomplished. In fact, that's the only thing that it accomplishes. All of these things need to be considered. All of these things are part of it, but they don't want to discuss that. They don't want that to be the primary impetus or focus. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that is not a good position. That is a dangerous position. And it's not a good place to advocate from. because it works against all that we hold near and dear and everything that has made us such a strong and free nation during a relatively brief period in the course of human events. It's just one of those things that cannot be ignored. And of course, they are going to try and ignore it because, again, if they can advocate for it from that position to where it allows their position to be true, then they win. That's literally what it comes down to. Now, with that said, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back with one last round of alcohol. Folks, she's not going to try and to strip and deprive you of your alcohol. And if she does, you have my permission to push her out of the plane. As always, folks, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for tuning in to the Wright Flyer. Folks, if you have not already done so, please subscribe. All subscribers are welcomed here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. Also, be sure to follow us on Twitter with the Twitter handle at Radio Aviation EX, at Radio Aviation EX, and there you will find the departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, Jeremy's personal Twitter account. You can also follow us on Google Plus and on Facebook. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for tuning in to the Wright Flyer. We hope to see you again next time. Please do take care.